housekeeping things as we get started. If you could, if you're not speaking, mute your microphone so that there's not too much background noise. As Candace had mentioned, depending on how the connection runs, we may ask people to turn their cameras off if they're not speaking. If you have a question, you can either raise your hand or you can put it in the discussion box to the right. And we have some people who are monitoring that so that we'll make sure that we get to those questions. I think I saw Brian Jones show up, and I know Chantel is here. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and get started here if that's okay with everybody. All right?
I'd also like to mention we're recording for all who are attending.
Okay. Thank you very much, Candace. Okay, as I mentioned, my name is Jim Como. I'm with the Ohio Department of Education, the Office of Federal Programs. I'm an assistant director in that office. Been there for about 2 years. I want to thank you all for joining us for what we're going to have as a continuing series of discussions, of training. Upcoming topics will include compliance and completing the One Plan, One Needs assessment. If there are other topics, you should feel free to reach out to your consultant in the Office of Federal Programs and see if we can get different topics on the books. So we're trying to adapt to the environment we're in. We can't go out and see you all in person, but we can talk to you this way, I guess. Okay. Today's session, our format will be a little different due to the nature of it. The purpose of this really is to update you and to provide some support for spending of CARES Act funds and the various questions that are going on around that. We're glad to be joined by Brian Jones of the Office of Grants Management. He'll talk about the Corona Relief Funds. His office administers those. Chantel Carter is also here, is our resident expert on non-public equitable service provisions. And then again, myself. So in a minute, we'll start with Brian talking about the coronavirus relief funds and any concerns, questions that arise under that. I'll talk about a few words about the ESSER funding, which is a big chunk of it. And then Chantel will touch on kind of the recent developments. And then we'll have periods for answering questions at that point. Okay. So Brian, if you're here, if you want to unmute yourself real quick, and then you have the floor to talk about the Corona Relief Funds and impart any wisdom you can. All right.
Very good. Can you hear me?
I can indeed. Thank you.
You can see me. Okay, that's good. All right. Good morning, everybody. I'll talk about, like I said, the Corona Relief Fund, the CRF, and the Broadband Ohio. Those two grants, and I'm sorry, my light's coming in my window. Those are not. The Office of Grants Management is administering it from a standpoint of it. Both those grants are in the CCIP, so we're reviewing the project cash request, the final expenditure reports, and then we'll make sure. We also have to make sure those grants make it to the single audits and all that good stuff. But all in all, those two grants are actually managed by both the Office of Budget Management, ODE, and even the governor's office. So it's really a group of people. So when you have questions about either of those grants, there is a email box that you'd send those questions to, and I don't have them handy. I apologize. And that's what's happening. If you have a question, it goes to that email box, and mainly OBM is helping us with those discussions. So let me back up a little bit. So the Coronavirus Relief Fund is actually a U.S. Treasury federal assistance. It is not U.S. Department of Education. With that said, the normal rules that we're used to with U.S. Department of Education don't necessarily apply. Meaning, the general requirements such as uniform guidance that you hear us talking about, or may have heard us talking about, not all of them apply. The three that apply for these two grants internal controls, financial management, and single audit. Notice I did not mention procurement, okay? So procurement is not a requirement for CRF, or Corona Relief Fund. Same with Broadband Ohio Connectivity Grant. That is, the source of that grant is the CRF funds. So break it down a little more. The CRF grant itself was $100 million. It went out to 1,700 entities. Same with the Broadband Ohio grant. That was for connectivity. And again, that was $50 million, and the same 700 entities were eligible to apply for that grant. So what's happened is those grants were put in the CCIP. We created new funds so that it's easier to track from a monitoring standpoint for your standpoint. When your districts or your schools go to report or account for those funds, it's easily to identify them for audit purposes. Trying to think what else. The other thing too with the CRF is it has to meet, when it comes to expenses, it has to meet three tenets. One, the main one, is it necessary for is a necessary expense due to the public health emergency and to mitigate COVID-19. That's the number one. The second one is these expenses cannot be budgeted prior to March 27th. The reason being, March 27th is when it was enacted, okay? And the third one, like now I just lost my train of thought. Necessary, I forget.
That's good.
Oh, it can go, and I'm sorry, the third one is the expenses can go back for the regular COVID, the regular CRF, the expenses can go back to March 13th, those expenses. So even though March 27th, you can't have anything budgeted, you can actually have expenses. Like right now, let's say in August, everybody got their application, and you got them approved, hopefully by now. You can actually have expenses back to March that are eligible, okay? But for the broadband connectivity, it is actually July 1 is the start date. The reason being is when they developed this grant, they wanted the governor's office, the OBM, Office of Budget Management, I'm sorry, they wanted to make sure that the broadband connectivity is to make sure schools were able to provide connectivity to all the students for school year, this school year coming up, and not pay for expenses in the past. So they're looking to make sure going forward, your students had access to broadband, to whatever they needed because of virtual. Because most schools are now implementing even more virtual education. So they wanted to make sure going forward that connectivity was there. Now, the other big thing with this grant, in bearer of bad news, is it ends 12/30/2020. Yes, it is only a 9 months. The reason for that is most of you don't know this, but grants actually are all of our federal grants actually end 12/30. Okay, what happens is in a normal cycle, districts receive grants from July 1 through July 1 through June 30th, and then you have the infamous FER, the final expenditure report, due, which is 90 days after that June 30th, which is the liquidation period. On September 30th is when ODE, at that point, ODE, that's our last day to obligate, and then we have 90 days to liquidate, which lands on December 30th. What we've done is with these funds, not us being the state, but the U.S. Treasury just basically said, all right, we're giving you these funds all the way to the end, which is 12/30, okay? Now, so your CRF, both CRF grants, both the regular CRF and the Broadband Ohio, will come to an end on 12/30/2020. We're kind of hoping and we're waiting that there's something that at the federal level that they're working to expand that. But as of right now, it hasn't passed. We're hoping that, like I've said to the governor's office in the meetings in the OBM, that I hope someone tells the pandemic that the public health emergency that it's supposed to be done by 12:30, right? Because what's going to happen is, as you probably already know this by now, is if you especially with the broadband, if you pick up contracts that are service related, right? So you pay a monthly fee, you're probably locked in, say, for a year. I'm making this up, for a year. Well, because you only have access to those funds till December, you have to prorate, right? So because I haven't finished my cup of coffee, if you have a license thing that you purchased or a plan you've purchased, and it's $1,200 for the year, you would prorate that out to $100 a month. So you would only be able to charge with it, let's say with broadband, July, August, September, October, November, December. That's 6 months. So you're only be able to charge $600 of the $1,200. Okay. Trying to think what else. And I'll finish up with this. I've given, yesterday I gave a presentation to the Corona Relief Fund update with OASBO, the Treasurers Association. One of the main things I've told them is when it comes to the CARES Act funding in general, the ESSER, both CRFs, and even some of you districts have received CARES money directly from the feds, HERF. Higher Education Relief Fund, right? Some of them receive that for your adult education. What I've told everybody is be creative, but don't be too creative. Meaning, sit down and look. Maybe it's a little late because you've already got ESSER in the play and you got some of these, but kind of look at all your CARES Act funds. Look at what grants you have and the timelines each one have, right? If you've applied for the broadband connectivity, Broadband Ohio connectivity grant, and you already get the CRF, you already know those are on shortened periods. Whereas the ESSER, you have until we have access to the grant until 2022. Okay, so you're going to have some expenses that are overlapped that are allowable on several of the grants. Making those decisions on, okay, this is a one-time expense, let's go ahead and charge it to CRF, it's allowable, right? So you want to spend down that CRF, right? A plan on having no carryover, okay? So and then the second part to that is being creative without being too creative is being able to explain or communicate what you've done, okay? Over the past several months since May, the questions we get, the one-off questions, is this allowable? Those are basically easy, right? Because we can then walk us through, is this, does it meet the tenets of the CRF? Does it meet the 12 different allowabilities of ESSER? That's good stuff. It's when it gets into, I want to pay for Brian Jones's salary and he does this, right? If you can't explain that simply to your auditor or to your monitor or your consultant, then you might want to rethink it. It doesn't make it wrong. It just makes it more work for you to make sure it's applicable, if that makes sense. You just want to make sure what you're charging, you can easily explain, okay? Trying to think if there's anything else. I think that's it for now. Is there anything you want me to add, Jim, that you can think of? I don't want to take up all your time.
You're not taking up our time, man. A couple of questions that have come in on the side.
Sure.
When we have Title I, if they acquire equipment, we need to label that equipment. Do they have to track their equipment, including broadband supplies? Or do they not have to do that with CRF?
So great question. So the broadband supplies, if you have equipment, if you actually bought equipment, because it's supposed to be for connectivity and ready available, like if you bought something that's a laptop or a iPad that's cellular enabled, most of those are going to be lower threshold, right? Lower than the threshold. So normally you may not put that on your equipment. However, If you plan to keep those items for a while, you could still, you should probably still try and track those, right? It really comes down to internal controls and then financial management, right? Even though it, like in the uniform guidance, the equipment section and procurement doesn't apply, your own district's policy of how you track things, I would still continue to use that, especially those iPads. And I don't know if Chromebooks, you can get them cellular enabled, but I don't know. But some of those things might be lower on the threshold, but they might be worth tracking. And that's really up to the district or the school, how you want to do that.
And Brian, there's one question that I'm going to just read because it's got terminology you might be most familiar with. And it's from Susan Pardee. And so if I miss it, please let me know. But the question was, do they need to have a specific policy or process in place for reimbursement for COVID-related expenses already bought and paid for after March 27, paid out of grant funds?
No, that is a great question. No, you don't have to have from our standpoint, let me preface that. From our standpoint, we're not looking for a policy to say that you went back in time. We're not looking for that. Now, if your district is requiring a policy, every district's slightly different, how they run things, how your board wants to be involved, that's different. But from our standpoint, what we're looking for is the normal, from grants management, right? We're looking for that invoice, canceled check, purchase order. We know that happened we can see that happened the 27th of March on. Now, yeah. So you want to make sure. Now, I'm glad Sue brought that question up. The one thing that's relatively new to this process is the how. Okay. In the past, you've had to identify this expense meets Title I because of this, or it met improving teacher quality back in the day. It was PD, and that's the how, right? In the coronavirus world, the how is specifically for CRF and the broadband. How is this expense covering the purchase? I'm sorry, covering the public emergency itself, right? That's the how, right? So, for example, everybody at some point, in your supplies, you've bought hand sanitizers, you've bought just to have in your schools, right? And you've bought sanitation stuff, clean and disinfectant and all that good stuff. You have that in your schools. But however, you had to buy like 10 times more, right? I have districts up north and ESCs up north that are building consortiums of purchase consortiums, right? Purchasing consortiums, I think that's what they're called. So they went and bought, they knew that hand sanitizers districts would buy maybe, let's say they might go through for the whole district 50 gallons, basically. I'm making this up. Well, now, districts are going through 150, 200 gallons of hand sanitizers and stuff like that, because it's now they have to have that in prevalent, not only in the hallways with stations or at the teachers' desks and all that good stuff. So they're buying 5 times or 2 times, 3 times more of this equipment. So that's the how, right? So the how would be, normally you buy 100 gallons. I'm making this up. Normally you buy 100 gallons. Well, now you're buying 300 gallons. So the additional 200 gallons is the how, right? How are you meeting this? Because we're trying to get ahead of this, right? So that's part of it. It's the how.
Thank you very much, Brian. So we're going to move on. If you have other CRF questions, feel free to put them on the discussion on the right. TB, that's absolutely fine. You can put those questions over there. Brian, I don't know if you're going to stick around or not, but if you do, great. If not, we'll get you these questions and we'll get answers to these folks as they need. Okay?
Thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot for joining us, Brian. So I'm going to move on to ESSER, and I'm going to really kind of echo some of what Brian just said, in that, the main criteria for us is how is this expenditure, how is this thing you want to put in your budget related to this thing we're going through, right? So the funds are very, very flexible, but we need to be able to tie them to something that arises out of this pandemic, okay? And so, we've seen requests, for example, to to change physical space in a building because they need to have extra space for social distancing, physical distancing, et cetera. And so for that purpose, just find a way to tie it back. If you've always had a renovation on your books, that you wanted to renovate this space, probably not a good thing to have in the record, right? But if you're doing it because of this, because you need to have a space for 60 students in a classroom rather than 30 students in a classroom, that's fine. Similarly, we've gotten requests for, to increase kind of the infrastructure of schools for, particularly for streaming and technology, things of that nature. And again, if it's related to the education of these students that you need to have additional infrastructure technology-wise, then that's acceptable. So it's a very broad grant, obviously. And the main criteria is it related to the thing we're going through? And the other thing I'd say is, we want you to spend your money on this, right? I know that, there are 600 and some odd traditional districts and 300 and some odd, 300 and some odd community schools that have received ESSER funds. And so each one of you has a different story. Some of you need the money now, and some of you even needed the money at the end of last fiscal year. And some of you are kind of sitting tight and figuring out how does this fit in a plan with available funds from CRF and other sources, et cetera. So I do understand that there are 1,000 different stories to tell or more, but these funds are available to kind of help you out with that. To date, we've spent about 10% of the funds that are available from ESSER. I know that a big part of why we have not spent faster, why districts have not spent faster, is because of the uncertainty surrounding the non-public issues, for instance. And so that is one factor. And again, as I said, each district, each community school is a separate story. And so I do get that each one has a different plan. But the funds are available. Please spend them. They're flexible. They're more flexible than a lot of the grants that we have. And so I won't say take advantage of, because that sounds a little bit wrong, but avail yourselves of the opportunity. And I will say that, the U.S. Department and Congress are looking at our pace of spending. Again, I think a big reason why the pace of spending has been low is because of uncertainty surrounding the non-public equitable service provision. Districts are kind of waiting to see how that shakes out. But they can see, the department and Congress can see how much funds have been spent. And then when we have people saying, quite rightly, advocates for the public school community saying that we need more help, some people are saying, well, then why haven't you spent all the money that we've given you? And so, work on your plans, and if this fits in your plan, great. But don't be scared to spend the money. If you need help, ask us for help. With that, I will have Chantel say a few words about where we are with the non-public issues and kind of provide us some updates there. And then we'll kind of dive into some questions. Chantel?
Perfect. Can you hear me, Jim?
Yes, I can.
Perfect. So we all know that there have been lots of changes with equitable services under ESSER, and we do ask districts and non-public schools to be patient as we're working through all that's happening in lack of guidance right now from the U.S. Department. Last week, we released CCIP Note 445, and the intent of that CCIP note was to let districts know that the interim final rule is no longer valid, that it has been overturned in the court system. The U.S. Department of Education has acknowledged that. So essentially, the Excel file we provided districts earlier in the summer with approach 1 and approach 2 for calculation, neither of those approaches now work. without guidance from the U.S. Department and without the interim final rule. The CARES Act legislation itself says to follow the rules of Section 1117. So we wanted to get that CCIP note out quickly, and we wanted districts to stop spending, right? Take a pause in spending, because if you have budgeted according to approach 2, you could be overspending what the non-public school would have under the rules of Section 1117. So take a pause, halt your services. We are working on additional guidance for services that have occurred prior to the interim final rule being overturned. So prior to September 4th or 9th or 11th, which are kind of the 3 key dates, the Federal Circuit Court judge made the ruling on September 4th. The U.S. Department of Education acknowledged it on their website on September 9th. And we have our CCIP note out on September 11th. So those are kind of the 3 points where you need to be thinking, we need to stop spending after that point until we can figure out what's going on. We're getting lots of questions, lots of scenarios from districts about how to make things right or shore things up. And we just don't have the answers right now. We are working on another CCIP note that will be coming out very shortly that has a calculation tool for districts that you will be able to take your low income data and use the tool to generate your equitable service amount. And then we have some additional guidance on specific spending scenarios that have occurred. But we know this judgment could be appealed. We know that we could be getting additional guidance from other sources. So we're just asking districts to be patient and take a pause with equitable services.
Thank you, Chantel. I think that's the best. Chantel, you were mostly you sound a little robotic, but I was able to understand you, so you were okay. Technology being what it is, huh? But so that's the latest and greatest in terms of the non-public equitable service. There was a question along the side from TB. That is exactly the kind of question that's going to arise. And so, TB, I don't know what district you're with, but we should, reach out to your consultant. We can help work you through that. There aren't additional funds. So if you were a district that had, for example, an obligation under the enrollment approach, and you sent that all out because you were acting in good faith according to guidance that the U.S. Department put out and that we informed you about, then we don't have a separate pot of money right now to kind of send additional funds out. So, but that is the kind of question that we need to kind of be aware of and work through. So, TB, again, I don't know what district you're with, but get in touch with your consultant. We'll work through the math to figure out where exactly things stand and how you resolve it from there. We had a question here about what do you do about PO that's already placed? Should we put them on hold with non-publics? So the PO, I guess there would be a question about you've already placed the PO. Do you have are you committed to that? Legally committed? Because one thing we don't want to do is expose public districts to any risk of canceling a contract, for instance. So again, this can be very fact specific. But if you have not executed a PO, I would kind of put them aside for now until we you are able to resolve how to provide those services. But if you've already paid the PO, then you have to honor it pretty much. So again, Dolores, that's a really good question. It's going to really be dependent upon where you are in that thing. If you can cancel the PO without, exposing the non-public or the district to risk, then I would say you should engage in ongoing meaningful consultation with your non-publics and explain to them why you want to cancel that PO. Um, and I'm sorry, Dolores, Chantel is answering faster than I do. And so let me just scroll through here real quick. And so LRM, Chantel answered your question. The guidance we had gotten initially from the U.S. Department was that we were limiting it to those non-publics that were within your bounds. And as Chantel quite rightly points, and so that is why we do now need to contemplate schools that are outside your bounds. Yeah, and so I would, LRM, I would encourage you, to reach out to your non-publics. Most of them are ones you're going to have relationships with, right, already from Title I, et cetera. There might be some that want to participate in this that have not participated in Title I for one reason or another. There might be new schools, for example, non-charter, non-tax schools. As Chantel points out, we have a new tool that we're working on with our best available data. And so I would just, as part of your consultation with them, just say, sit tight. We know we might need to send you some money for services for students at your schools, but we're getting that information. Kathy, that is a really good question. Targeted assistance in case 6. Thank you, Chantel. Thank you for reaching out on that question, because that is a trickier thing when you get into the targeted assistance model. And so that is that. Are there any other questions that we need to answer real quick? Not real quick, excuse me. So the new calculation, the spreadsheet internally, we are pretty far down the road of producing it. And so we're looking for the verbiage around direction. So if you think back to the spreadsheet we provided you when we initially thought this was resolved back in the spring, it came with a set of instructions, right? It had some verbiage attached to it, and that is what we're working on to make sure. So we've drafted it, but we're having people internally kind of look at it to make sure, as we ask you to step through a different process, and that there's as much clarity as can be. So obviously we're using words to then talk about a spreadsheet. So clarity is a relative thing, I suppose. So Susan, that's the same question that has arisen. I mean, if you already expended more than exceeded the new allotment of non-public, we do not have at this point additional funds to make up for that difference. And so, I would encourage you to reach out to your consultant, and we'll see where you are, and if there's anything that can be done in terms of the amount of funds that are available. And again, this is part of your ongoing, continuing, meaningful consultation with non-publics that hopefully you have a relationship with, and we will, if you acted in good faith, if the district acted in good faith and was trying to comply with the varied rules that were promulgated by the U.S. Department, we'll be there to support you where we can, but we do not have additional money at this point. So let me see. I think you just answered that, Chantel. So TB asks if ESSER purchase supplies need labels. If you're talking about the non-public side, the equipment still belongs to the district, so it should be tracked and et cetera that way. I don't know that you need a separate label saying purchase with ESSER funds, but you should be able to track and monitor and take an inventory of the equipment. Yeah, the question about procurement, and that was by, who asked that? Laura Verdon, and I apologize if I mispronounce your last name. But Laura, can you give me a little bit of kind of additional context for that? The procurement question, it's not ringing a bell to me what the question was in terms of procurement. Or Amy, if you know what that question is getting at, please let me know. Okay.
Jim, this is Jeremy. I'm going to chime in here on the procurement side. So I see the question is, Brian was indicating that the CFR and the broadband do not follow the same necessary guidance and uniform guidance as what would be under ESSER, right, under the CARES Act. So the question, it looks like, is the CFR, there's no procurement requirements. I don't know if Brian necessarily said there was no procurement. It didn't follow the actual, even with CFR, you should be following your district's procurement policy. But with the ESSER funds, yes, there's nothing in the CARES Act that removes the procurement requirements and the policies that districts need to follow for procurement. So you should follow your procurement policies.
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy. That's right, and that's whenever we get questions about should we, how should we go about procuring? The district should have a policy and should follow it. That's going to put you in good stead, whether it's talking to us or talking to Brian's group or talking to an auditor. So thanks, Jeremy.
No problem. I know there's a lot of questions, and Chantel, thank you, and Jim, on the non-public equitable services, and please keep sending us your questions. I'm just going to make a general comment to kind of piggyback on what Chantel mentioned. These are, we fully understand the difficult situation that school districts and non-public schools are in. We at the Ohio Department of Education, tried to and I think the beginning work that we did with the non-public equitable services put us in a better position than what many other states are in, because they did not spend the funds. Let's remember, these were our emergency funds for a pandemic, and we've had 6 months of somewhat ambiguity on what's happening with the non-public equitable services. So, our initiative and administration of the CARES funds and the ESSER funds in particular was, let's get these out the door. Let's provide as clear guidance as we can. And so on the equitable services, if you recall, we asked you to set aside the higher amounts of both the low income and the enrollment, and do not spend more than the lower amount. So in most cases, we hope that was followed by districts. We understand there will be a short period of time where the interim final rule became final to when it was rescinded, that districts could have spent more, provided more services to non-publics than they had budgeted. There are a bunch of scenarios that we're getting from school districts and non-publics, and we are working on guidance to provide our best thinking on what the districts and the non-public schools should do in these scenarios. What we do not have is we have not received any guidance or any information from the U.S. Department of Education as to what to do in these situations. So, we are going to strongly encourage school districts to work with your own internal legal counsels on any of these particular issues. We'll give you our best thinking at this time. But as Chantel said, we're suggesting where there are services that are going to be provided outside of Chapter 1117, that you take a pause on those particular areas. And when if there are situations where there are funds that have been expended because you followed the procedures and processes of what the U.S. Department of Education suggested with the interim final rule, and those hopefully rare circumstances, we do not know if there will be any requirement to seek reimbursement. We have heard districts that are withholding, auxiliary services from the non-public schools. We do not think that is an action that should be taken. In other words, you'd be taking your own corrective action without having a full understanding of what will be occurring. So we're asking for patience and a pause until we can provide more clarity. And as Chantel indicated, my hope is that we will be able to provide even later this week another CCIP note with some of this in writing to you of what our recommendations would be. But please note, we are working with. We'll have to talk with the Ohio Attorney General and obviously our legal counsel to make sure that what we provide in guidance is something that is not going to put us or you in any more harm. So in these circumstances where rules and laws have changed in the middle of an implementation of a grant, it's best to make decisions to minimize the risk. And in this case, that's one of those situations. So during your consultation with your non-public schools, I think it's fair that you indicate, that, we understand that services need to be rendered and provided, but we have until September 30th of 2022 to liquidate and spend these funds. Services will be rendered, but you're not going to have all the answers right now. Thank you.
Yeah, and TB along the side pointed out that the Representative ODE had told him that the interim final rule was final, and the answer to that is because the interim final rule, the way interim final rules work, as a part of the regulatory system at the federal level, is interim final rules are treated as final. So that was the law at that time. Now, the next part of the comment that TB offered was that they did so and they spent far more than they were allowed. Now, what I'd say is it's not that you weren't allowed to spend that. You spent that. Now, you could say it's far more than we should have in light of subsequent developments, but if you were following the then existing guidance, it's not that you weren't allowed to do it. But the point is we don't have money to send to make up that difference right now. So
yeah, Jim, if I could add to
Yep,
that. So,
please.
TV, the guest, yeah, as Jim just said, the interim final rule, and all you have to do, you can get on the U.S. Department's website. What Jim is saying is correct. The interim final rule is a final rule. Was a final rule. It was law at that time. And we can get into the particulars of what the interim final rule said, but I think you all know the interim final rule gave several options for school districts in order to calculate their equitable service amounts. One would be enrollment, right? And if you didn't do it by enrollment of non-publics within your school district, then you had to do it by other options, including what would have been Chapter 1117 and low income model. Some districts could have selected because the enrollment would have been more advantageous to them to not follow Chapter 1117. And let's say there were circumstances where you have a school district that does not have any non-public schools within the district boundaries. So certainly one would could make the argument that it's more advantageous for the school district to use the enrollment model because there's no non-public schools within their district boundaries. And if that's the case, the interim rule specified that they could do that. But Chapter 1117, which is now the requirement, that same district would have had a service amount that they would have to provide. So if that district had spent all of its allocation, as Jim is indicating, in that short window of period of time, then that would, could cause a situation where there's no service amounts still, is that going to have to come out of the school district's general fund because they spent all their ESSER funds, because they followed the guidance in the actual law at that time? We do not know that answer. And what Jim was also saying is we're going to do what we can from the Ohio Department of Education standpoint to defend and support school districts that followed our guidance and followed the law. What we can't say is when predict what is going to happen. This is not unique to Ohio. This is something that's happened across the country with the same questions and same answers. I imagine Congress and the U.S. Department are trying to determine, how best to handle this. I think what we just need to recognize is there are circumstances that have occurred because people were following good faith and following the law and the procedures at that time that do not now mirror what is required under Chapter 1117. So we're going to provide the support and the information as it comes available, and that's why we're saying let's that you have that consultation with your non-public schools, recognize and discuss the situation, but in these circumstances where it would cause more risk, we suggest that you take a pause.
Thanks, Jeremy. Chantel, I think, has caught up with a couple of questions on the side, particularly about the kind of the mechanics of Section 11 or 1117. And so I think we're kind of current on our questions. Early on, somebody had asked, do we have slides? Because of the nature of this, we did not. I didn't prepare slides. I don't know what I could have done in terms of slides. I probably could have had something. Regardless, we didn't have slides for this. The format for our trainings for future ones, whether it's compliance or for the one plan needs assessment, we probably will have slides and capture screen captures, etc. But we do not have slides for this one. If there are more questions, you can certainly type them into the side, or you can raise your hand and we'll answer them. And I'll stick around for at least 10 more minutes and beyond that if I need to, okay? Again, thank you all for joining us, and we will have a series of these. Diane, I think we're going to talk about compliance next time. If you want to say a few words about that. If you don't, that's fine as well, since I'm putting you on the spot.
No, we are compliance, and we will, compliance is going to be moving to a new cloud-based system this year. So there will be some changes that you'll see as you get into compliance. It's going to be similar to the one needs assessment. So we'll talk a little bit about those changes to expect the next time, as well as what to do to prepare for a compliance visit from, our office, as well as what is the purpose, or why do we do compliance? Why, what is our reasoning behind doing these visits, besides they're required by the federal, but we have, a philosophy about monitoring compliance that, we try to guide ourselves under as we go through this process with districts.
Thanks, Diane, for those. A couple things, when we don't know what our next part of the year is going to look like, right? And so at this point, I would not expect us to be on site visiting people, but that might happen depending on how things develop. One of the things I try to reiterate, and Diane, I think, is kind of touching on there, is, compliance has always been this boogeyman, this thing to be scared of. And we really are trying to shift our mindset of, this is a way to support you. It's not a punishment. It is to make sure that, that we can support you, whether it's as auditors come through or other kind of internal controls monitoring comes through, that we can help. Good question about accessing the recording. I don't know how that's made available. Candace, if you're around, can you pipe in either on the side or let me know?
Sure. We will go ahead and get this recording uploaded to YouTube, and I will send the link to registrants in the next couple days, by the end of the week.
Hey, Jim, Jeremy
please.
here again,
Yep, please do.
and Chantel or anybody else on the, from the staff wants to, to chime in on what I say. But I think it's really important. We're working, I know Chantel mentioned we're working on a kind of a table, a spreadsheet of the data that would be pertinent to the Chapter 1117 data for non-public school equitable services. That will require, in some cases, some adjustments that the districts will need, and to upload that accordingly to the application, and any budget revisions that you would need in your ESSER application. But I would just like to remind everybody the information that we'll have on those spreadsheets is the data that we have. Getting a little background noise, so if somebody put their cell phone
Şey
mute.
zaten ancak o kadar gösteriyor değil mi? 190. Tamam 190.
Could you put yourself on mute, sir? Thank you. So the question would be to make sure that you review that data. Just, that is that's the data that we're providing as a helpful resource, but it ultimately is the school district's responsibility to meet the requirements and comply with the equitable services, which includes the data. So the data that we have has to be verified. So, and we also need to make sure that only the eligible non-public school districts are receiving services. That includes no for-profit non-public schools receiving these services either. So thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. All right, like I said, I'll stick around. Okay, hold on here. Let's see. So N. Brown asked about SQUIG. So can you, let me put my email aside and email me your district, okay? I will say something just broadly. I know that the review process has been slower this year. That's in large part due to the fact that we've had to review both ESSER and consolidated applications. So if you need it to submit PCRs, or if you need a 2020 application to get your FERs, just nudge your federal programs consultant as gently as possible, and then they will hector myself and Diane to get those into final approved status or getting them right status. So I appreciate your patience. I'm not making excuses, but that's what you can do. But I'm going to put my email on the side here, if I can type my name, which I was able to. And feel free to email me, whoever N. Brown is, and I'll look into the SQUIG question you have. Okay.
Jim, I added my email too. I did
Okay.
wanted to mention that we are having, besides these series once a month, we're also providing the new coordinators academy. That's also once a month for those who are new coordinators that really just need some big overall ideas or understandings about federal program and the CCIP and consolidated, and some of those things that for those of us have been around for a while, we just know those things, but yet it's not so easy for those who are new into the field and don't have the historical knowledge that those of us that have been around for a while. So just if you know of anybody, even if it's not your federal programs consultant, but maybe it's your treasurer or someone else that you think in your district may benefit from attending those series, they're more than welcome to attend.
And I want to reiterate something that Chantel said on the side. Thank you guys for coming here. Hopefully it'll be a good series for you and for us, and we'll continue on. So if you need anything, we're here for a little while longer. Otherwise, we will see you next month. And you obviously were able to hook up with us here, so Candace will be able to set you up for next time too. So thanks, Candace and Chun, for kind of helping us in the logistics and the technical stuff that I'm inept at. But so thanks. Candace, Chun, the question about is it on Stars yet? I don't know if the next one's on Stars yet.
Good morning. It is being put into Stars, so please check within the next week or so, and you'll be able to find that registration information. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chun.
Well, Jim and Chantel and Diane and Chun, Candace, and you want to thank you all for what you put on, and just Chantel and Jim, as you just mentioned, thank you to everybody that's able to join, and keep your suggestions coming to us. We not just the questions, but how we can better support you and serve you. So thank you so much. And Jim and Diane, thanks for putting this together.
All right. Thank you all very much. We've reached 11 o'clock. I'll probably stick around for a couple more minutes, but you're all free to go. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you next month. Matthew, I see your question about transferring ESSER expenses to CRF. I'm not sure exactly what you mean. There's really no mechanism for transfer like you would do for between grants. So there's no kind of technical mechanism to do that. Whether or not you could back out payment from ESSER and then put it under CRF is a kind of a grants management question. But I'd encourage you to reach out to your federal programs consultant. Bridget, that's a good question. Candace, if you're still around, do you have any insight about last week's coordinator session? But Matthew, I would encourage you to reach out to your federal programs consultant.
Hi, Jim. Yes,
Yeah.
the recording is available. It should be on the CCIP document library, and we can reach out to you and provide that link.
Yeah, and Matthew, I would suggest that you follow your district's policy on that with the CRF. If you record it, if you decide to recode your purchase order underneath the CRF, you want to make sure that you're following the guidelines for the CRF grant. Prior to doing that, and it's within the substantially approved date for that grant, since it is different from ESSER, and that it's an allowable cost. So those are just things for you to consider.
All right, I have a meeting to go to. Thank you all for joining us, and I will see you soon. Thank you. Take care.